It was Christmas Eve, 1945, a time for peace, for family, for quiet celebration after the long, dark years of war. In the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a blanket of cold settled over the hills. Inside the two-story home of the Sodder family, warmth and laughter filled the air. The older children, home for the holidays, had convinced their mother, Jenny, to let them stay up late, just a little longer, to play with their new toys, to bask in the glow of the Christmas tree. No one could have known, not in their wildest, darkest nightmares, that this simple, happy evening was a prelude to a mystery that would haunt their family and this town for generations to come. A fire was coming, and with it, questions that would never find answers. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the sweet anticipation of Christmas morning. 9 of the 10 Sodder children were home, their voices a symphony of youthful energy. George and Jenny Sodder, Italian immigrants who had carved out a life for themselves in the heart of Appalachia, watched over their bustling household with pride. The night was ordinary, almost comfortingly so. But beneath the surface of this festive scene, something was amiss. A strange phone call, a man watching from the road, small, unsettling details that, in hindsight, would seem like ominous notes in a tragic score. The kind of details that make you wonder, was it all just a terrible accident? Or was something far more sinister at play? Think about it. A family tucked into their beds, dreaming of the morning to come, the presents wrapped and waiting. The world outside was quiet, draped in the stillness of a holiday night. But a clock was ticking down to a moment that would change everything. A moment that would erase 5 young lives from the family portrait, leaving behind only smoky outlines and the ghost of a question. What happened to them? The fire that would soon consume their home was not just a blaze of wood and plaster. It was a fire that would ignite one of America's most enduring and heartbreaking mysteries, a puzzle with missing pieces that still torment the curious and the heartbroken to this day. As the hour grew late and the younger children drifted off to sleep, the older ones, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, remained awake in the attic, their makeshift bedroom. Their laughter was the last sound of normalcy to grace the Sodder home. It was a sound that would echo in their parents' memories for the rest of their lives, a final, fleeting moment of joy before the unthinkable happened, before the smoke, the flames, and the desperate, frantic search began, a search that in many ways has never truly ended. The night was about to turn from one of celebration to one of utter, devastating loss, a night that would vanish 5 children into thin air. George Sodder was a man who had built his life from the ground up. He had arrived in America from Tula, Sardinia in 1908, a young boy of 13 with little more than ambition in his pockets. He found his way to the coal country of West Virginia and, through sheer hard work, established a successful trucking company. He had a reputation for being a good man, but also an opinionated one. He was never shy about his criticisms of Italy's dictator Benito Mussolini, a fact that didn't always sit well with some in the local Italian-American community. This was a man who had achieved the American dream, a life of prosperity and family, far from the political turmoil of his homeland. His wife, Jenny Cipriani Sodder, was the heart of the home. Also an Italian immigrant, she was a devoted mother to their 10 children: Joe, Marion, George Jr., Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty, John, and the youngest, Sylvia. Their large, rambling house on the outskirts of Fayetteville was always filled with activity, a testament to the big, vibrant family they had created. They were well regarded in the community, a picture-perfect example of a hard-working family living a good life. But even in the coziest of towns, shadows can linger. And George's outspoken nature, some would later say, may have cast a long, dangerous shadow over his family. The children were everything to George and Jenny. The older ones helped with the family business, while the younger ones filled the house with the chaos and joy that only a large brood can bring. They were a close-knit clan, their lives interwoven with the rhythms of school, church, and work. Christmas was a particularly special time, a culmination of a year's hard work and a celebration of their togetherness. The presents under the tree that Christmas Eve of 1945 were not just gifts, they were symbols of the life George and Jenny had built, a life they thought was safe and secure within the 4 walls of their home, a life they were about to see go up in smoke. But were there cracks in this idyllic picture? It seemed so. George had had arguments, some of them heated, over his political views. There had been a strange incident with an insurance salesman who tried to sell him a policy, and when George refused, the man had warned him that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed. There was also a man who, while trying to get work, had pointed to the fuse boxes and ominously told George they would cause a fire someday. These were small, troubling moments, easily dismissed at the time, but after the fire they would return, replaying in George's mind like a warning he had failed to heed. The night began its descent into chaos just after midnight. Jenny Sodder was awakened by the ringing of the telephone. When she answered, a woman on the other end asked for a name she didn't recognize. Jenny told the caller she had the wrong number and hung up, noticing as she did that the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked. She assumed the older children who had stayed up late had simply forgotten. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and returned to bed. It was a minor, forgettable disruption, but it was just the beginning. Around 1 a.m., she was jolted awake again, this time by a loud thud on the roof, followed by the sound of something rolling down. Then came the smell. Smoke. Thick and acrid, it was pouring into their bedroom. Jenny woke George, and in an instant they realized the house was on fire. George's office, located in the front of the house, was completely engulfed in flames. Panic set in. They grabbed their youngest child, 2-year-old Sylvia, who slept in their room, and screamed for the other children. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children, John, George Jr., Marion, and Sylvia, managed to escape the inferno, stumbling out into the freezing night air. But 5 of their children, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8, and Betty 5, were trapped upstairs in the attic. The horror of that moment is almost impossible to imagine. The parents and their escaped children stood barefoot in the snow, watching in helpless terror as the flames devoured their home. They screamed for the children in the attic, their voices lost in the roar of the fire. George, in a desperate bid to save them, smashed a window to get back inside, cutting his arm in the process. But the heat and smoke were too intense. It was a wall of fire, impossible to penetrate. The staircase to the attic had become a ladder of flames, completely impassable. The children were cut off, locked in their fiery prison with no way out. The scene was one of frantic, failed attempts. George ran to find his ladder, the one he always kept propped against the side of the house. It was gone, vanished. It would later be found thrown in an embankment over 75 feet away. His next idea was to drive one of his big work trucks up to the house and climb on top of it to reach the attic window. But in a cruel twist of fate, neither of his trucks, which had been working perfectly the day before, would start. The engines coughed and sputtered but refused to turn over. Every avenue of rescue, every desperate plan was inexplicably thwarted. All they could do was watch and wait and pray for a miracle that would not come. In the midst of the chaos, Marion, one of the older daughters, ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department. But the phone was dead. She couldn't get a dial tone. Another neighbor saw the blaze and tried to call from a nearby tavern, but again, no operator responded. It was later discovered that the Sodders' phone line had been cut, severed high up on the pole. Was it the fire or something else? It was another baffling obstacle in a night full of them. Precious minutes, then an hour, ticked by as the fire raged, unchecked. The family and the small crowd of neighbors that had gathered could only look on as the house that held 5 children was consumed. Finally, someone managed to drive into town and track down Fire Chief F.J. Morris, who then initiated a phone tree system to summon the volunteer firefighters from their beds. But the response was agonizingly slow. The Fayetteville Fire Department was small, under-equipped, and understaffed. By the time the fire engine finally arrived at the Sodder home, it was nearly 8 in the morning. The house was no longer a house. It was a smoking, smoldering ruin. A skeleton of its former self, with only the chimney standing tall against the morning sky. The fire had burned for 7 long hours before any official help arrived. For the Sodders, the late arrival of the fire department was just another layer of the nightmare. They had been alone, fighting a battle they could not win. When Chief Morris and his men finally began to sift through the ashes, the family clung to a desperate, horrifying hope that they would find the remains of their children. But as the hours of searching stretched on, they found nothing. Not a bone, not a skull, not a single identifiable trace of the 5 children who had been sleeping in the attic. Chief Morris told the grieving parents that the fire had been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies. A plausible explanation, perhaps. But George and Jenny Sodder could not accept it. Jenny, who had worked in a crematorium, knew that even the most intense fires, burning for hours, still leave behind skeletal remains. The fire that destroyed their wooden frame house had burned hot and fast, but could it have been hot enough to obliterate every last trace of 5 children? It seemed impossible. The official explanation was handed down. The fire was caused by faulty wiring and the 5 missing children had perished in the blaze. Death certificates were issued. The case for the authorities was closed. But for the Sodder family, it was the beginning of a lifelong search for the truth. The official story simply didn't add up for George and Jenny. Their grief was immense, but it was quickly overshadowed by a growing cloud of suspicion. The lack of remains was the most glaring inconsistency. They consulted a crematorium employee who confirmed Jenny's belief. Bones would have survived a house fire, even a very hot one. Furthermore, a search of the debris in the days following the fire turned up appliances, parts of the tin roof, and other metal objects that had been in the house. If these items could survive the blaze, how could the skeletal structures of 5 children have vanished completely? It was a question that would become the cornerstone of their doubt. Then there were the strange clues, the oddities from that night that gnawed at them. The missing ladder, which should have been their first and best hope for a rescue, wasn't just misplaced. It was found a significant distance away, thrown into a ditch. Why would anyone move it? And the 2 work trucks, both inexplicably refusing to start. George, a mechanic by trade, would later find that both vehicles appeared to have been tampered with. It felt less like a string of bad luck, and more like a carefully orchestrated series of events, designed to prevent any attempt to save the children trapped in the attic. The strange phone call just after midnight also took on a sinister new meaning. The woman with the wrong number, the unlocked door, the lights left on. Were these distractions? A way to ensure Jenny was awake and aware just before the fire started? And what about the loud thud on the roof? George and Jenny later found a small, dark green, rubber-like object in the yard. They believed it was the remnants of a pineapple bomb, a type of hand grenade, or some other incendiary device thrown onto the roof to start the fire. This suggested that the blaze wasn't an accident caused by faulty wiring, but a deliberate act of arson. The pieces of the puzzle were troubling and pointed away from the official narrative. The cut phone line, discovered by a telephone repairman, was perhaps the most damning piece of evidence. It wasn't burned through, it had been cleanly cut, high up on the pole, an act that required someone to climb it. This single fact transformed the tragedy from a possible accident into a probable crime. Someone, it seemed, had wanted to isolate the Sodder family, to ensure that no help could be called while the fire did its terrible work. For George and Jenny, the conclusion was inescapable. Their children had not died in the fire. They had been taken. In the months and years that followed the fire, the Sodders' belief that their children were alive was fueled by a series of tantalizing and often heartbreaking reports. Sightings began to trickle in from across the country. A woman who ran a tourist stop between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed to have seen the children in a car that passed by on the morning of the fire. She said she served them breakfast at her establishment. Another woman, at a hotel in Charleston, saw the children's photos in a newspaper and claimed to have seen 4 of the 5 a week after the fire. They were, she said, with 2 men and 2 women, all of whom appeared to be of Italian extraction. These were not isolated incidents. A woman in St. Louis, Missouri, wrote to the Sodders, claiming that Martha, the oldest missing girl, was being held in a convent there. A bartender in Texas overheard a conversation between 2 men who were bragging about a fire that had happened on Christmas Eve in West Virginia. The stories were often vague, impossible to verify, but for a family desperate for answers, each one was a flicker of hope. George Sodder traveled thousands of miles, chasing down every lead, following every whisper on the wind. He would show up in towns armed with photos and questions, only to have the trail go cold. The family's private investigation uncovered more unsettling details. They learned of a man who had allegedly been seen stealing a block and tackle from their property shortly before the fire. This could have been used to cut the phone line or gain access to the house. They hired a private investigator from a nearby town, a man named C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley discovered the strange story about the insurance salesman who had threatened George. He also learned that the fire chief, F.J. Morris, had found a human heart in the ashes, which he had secretly buried in a metal box. This was a shocking revelation. When confronted, Morris led George to the spot and they dug up the box. Inside was what appeared to be a fresh beef liver, untouched by the fire. The discovery felt like a deliberate deception. a cruel attempt to placate the family and close the case. Why would the fire chief plant evidence? Was he part of a cover-up? The incident shattered any remaining faith the Sodders had in the official investigation. It solidified their conviction that powerful forces were working against them, hiding a truth they were not meant to find. Their quest for answers became an obsession, a defining purpose for the remainder of their lives. Years turned into decades. The Sodder family never rebuilt their home on the site of the fire. Instead, they turned the land into a memorial garden for their lost children, a constant public testament to their unwavering belief that they were still alive somewhere. In 1952, they erected a large billboard along Route 16, featuring the photos of the 5 children and offering a reward, first $5,000, then $10,000, for any information that would lead to their recovery. The billboard became a local landmark, a solemn reminder of the mystery that refused to die. It stood for over 30 years, its hopeful message slowly fading under the West Virginia sun. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, a letter arrived. It was postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, and addressed simply to Jenny Sodder. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his late 20s. He had dark curly hair and dark eyes, and his features bore a striking resemblance to their son Louis, who would have been around that age. On the back of the photograph, a cryptic message was scrawled, "Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie, Elil Boys, a 90132 or 35. The message was bizarre, almost nonsensical, but the photo was electrifying. For Jenny and George, the photograph was the proof they had been waiting for. This was their son. They were convinced of it. The resemblance was too strong to be a coincidence. They immediately hired another private detective and sent him to Kentucky to investigate the letter's origin. But the detective took their money and was never heard from again. The family tried to incorporate the image onto their billboard, but the process of adding the aged-up photo of Louis next to his childhood picture only brought them more anguish. The trail once again had gone cold, leaving them with a tantalizing clue that led nowhere. The photograph remains one of the most compelling and confounding pieces of the Sodder mystery. Who sent it? Was it a cruel, calculated hoax designed to prey on the emotions of a grieving family? Or was it a genuine, desperate attempt by a grown-up Louis to reach out to the family he had been taken from? The strange inscription on the back has been analyzed endlessly. Was Elil Boys a misspelling, a code, a reference to something only the family would understand? Like every other clue in this case, the photograph raised more questions than it answered. A single, haunting image that offered a glimmer of hope before plunging the family back into darkness. Over the decades, 3 main theories have emerged from the smoke and ashes of the Sodder home, each attempting to explain the impossible disappearance of 5 children. The first and simplest is the official story. It was a tragic accident. The fire was caused by faulty wiring, and it burned so intensely that the children's bodies were completely incinerated. Proponents of this theory point to the fact that house fires can reach incredibly high temperatures, and the children's small bones could have been reduced to ash. The strange events, the missing ladder, the stalled trucks, were just a tragic series of coincidences. The second theory is the one the Sodder family themselves believed. It was a kidnapping, likely orchestrated by the Sicilian mafia. George Sodder's vocal anti-Mussolini sentiments had made him enemies within the local community. The threats he received, the cut phone line, the evidence of arson, it all pointed to a planned attack. In this scenario, the fire was set as a diversion. While the family was distracted by the blaze, accomplices entered the home and abducted the 5 children from the attic. The children were then taken away, perhaps to Italy, and raised under new identities, forever lost to their family. A third, more complex theory attempts to blend the two. It suggests that the fire was indeed an accident, but that one of the older children, perhaps Maurice, managed to get his siblings out of the house. Fearing they would be blamed for starting the fire, they ran away. This theory, however, seems unlikely. It's hard to imagine that 5 children, the youngest only 5 years old, could successfully flee in the middle of a winter night and remain hidden for the rest of their lives. It fails to explain the cut phone line or the tampered-with trucks. A darker variation of the kidnapping plot suggests that the children were taken by someone known to the family, perhaps an individual with a grudge against George, or someone involved in an illegal adoption ring. The possibilities are endless and deeply unsettling. Was it a business rival? A political adversary? The truth is, we don't know. Each theory has its believers and its detractors. Each one leaves unanswered questions. The fire may have been an accident or it may have been a crime. But without bodies, without a confession, and without definitive proof, the fate of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sodder remains etched in smoke, a story with no final chapter. George and Jenny Sodder spent the rest of their lives searching for their lost children. They followed every lead, spent their life savings on private investigators, and never gave up hope. George passed away in 1968, a year after receiving the mysterious photograph of the man who looked so much like Louis. He went to his grave believing his children were out there somewhere, and that powerful people in their small town knew what happened and had helped cover it up. His stubborn refusal to accept the official story was the engine that kept the search alive for more than 2 decades. Jenny lived for another 21 years, a long and lonely vigil. She continued to tend the memorial garden she and George had planted at the site of their home. She wore black for the rest of her life, a permanent state of mourning for the children she was certain had been stolen from her. Even in her final years, she would talk to her surviving children about the missing 5, keeping their memory alive, holding on to the faintest sliver of hope that one day they might come home. When she died in 1989, the billboard on Route 16 was finally taken down. The most public symbol of the family search was gone, but the mystery remained. The surviving Sodder children, and now their children, have continued the quest for answers. They have maintained websites, spoken with reporters, and pushed for new investigations into the case. Sylvia, the youngest, who was just 2 years old on the night of the fire, has been one of the most vocal advocates for her lost siblings. She was the last person to see them alive, a memory she doesn't have but a connection she deeply feels. For her and the rest of the family, the story is not a piece of folklore or a cold case. It is a deep personal wound that has never healed. Today, on June 14, 2025, nearly 80 years have passed since that fiery Christmas Eve. The questions that haunted George and Jenny Sodder still hang in the air. Was it a terrible accident compounded by a series of unbelievable coincidences? Or was it a sinister plot, a kidnapping hidden by flames and a small-town cover-up? The truth, whatever it may be, seems to have vanished along with the children. All that is left is the story, a heartbreaking American mystery that reminds us that sometimes the deepest losses are the ones that leave no trace, only a permanent aching void where answers should be.